Hey guys, so I was playing Skyrim the other day, and then when I paused the game, Midnight said that the pause menu actually looked really good. I said it looked really bad, but then she said I was bad, and then I said that she was bad, and then she said that she could take me in a game of Tekken, and then I said, no way, there's no possible way that you can take me in a game of Tekken. Let me show you what good pause menus are, because my pause menus are even better than her pause menus.
You ever have a moment while you're playing a game where you're just like,
I need to
we all have, but you can't just leave your game just sitting there. What if an enemy comes and kills you? What if your time runs out because you have to leave the game just sitting there? This is known as the pause menu. Something that's a placeholder for when you need to take a break or mess with settings for your game. There is surprisingly a lot of work and art put into the pause menus in this day and age, but it wasn't always like that.
That's right, back in the day you didn't have a full-out menu. Rather, what we had was just a
So back in the ages of 8 and 16-bit gaming, developers didn't have a whole lot to work with when it came to the size of their games. SNES games could only hold 128 megabytes of storage, with the NES holding even less. So they'd have to cut corners whenever they could, and the first place that they did this was with pausing the game. Pausing an NES game would actually just freeze the game, and if you were getting a premiere experience, it would be accompanied by something like with the word pause. Yeah, I know, I'm also extremely disappointed that they didn't use the word hesitate instead. But that would usually just be mapped to the select or start button of the controller. Some games like Battletoads would actually give you a super funky beat when you pause. Before the NES, if you wanted to pause the game, it would just be like. But at some point, Capcom got wild and super ambitious and allowed players in their Mega Man series to change settings while the game was frozen via a selection of text that you could pick from. This was known as the first pause menu that I can remember. It may not be the actual first one, but for me, it's the earliest one that I can remember. It is closer to an inventory menu, which is different, but the fact that it pauses the game puts it just in the category that we need it to be in. This menu addition was huge, and it was now a dual function for the game. Mega Man did a lot for platformers and game design as a whole during the NES era, but this was something that I think a lot of people overlook. Moving forward into the next generation of gaming, it exploded onto the scene. Pause menus were in every game, and having a very clever pause menu was actually just expected of you at this point. With having a lot more space to work with, it was much easier for the developers to add those menus for the players to pause the game. And from here on out, the industry would have a standard, because pause menus now are in every single game, and they're required.
So the history of pause menus is very short and sweet. Not very many people talk about them, as they're not very prevalent when talking about game mechanics, but to me, I feel like they're very important. Maybe it's because most take the stance of function over form, but there's some really cool pause menus out there, and I don't hear a lot of people talking about them.
So me being the pause menu loving Metroid Prime Controls hating Nintendo schmuck that I am, I decided to take a look at some pause menus that I think are good, maybe throwing some bad ones in there too. So what are we gonna start out with? Okay, so it's okay for me to like this pause menu because it's not the controls of the game. Metroid Prime's pause menu is actually really sweet. You have the options, logbook, and inventory all in one place. This menu is an all-in-one type of setup, and it really feels like it was just a part of Samus's interface. If you're like me, you can also just lose a lot of time reading up in the logbook about the lore of the game. There's so much interesting stuff that you can just overlook very easily. Another game's pause menu that I can easily get lost in though is Persona 5's. Now, it's hard not to talk about this game when discussing art styles or menus, but I'll do my hardest to be just like everybody else. So I'm only about 3 hours into the game at this point, and I know I have another 177 hours left to go, but even this early in, I'm able to get lost in this pause menu. The colors just pop right off the screen, and the way Joker moves around adds a lot of personality, makes it super slim and sharp and just very engaging. It's an experience just to go through the options and mess around inside of this menu. There's so much that you can do and then just get wowed by how cool it looks doing it. I mean, hell, even saving in this game is a cool experience. That's pretty impressive to be able to pull off. Now, on the opposite end of that spectrum, the Skyrim has to be one of the most boring pause menus possible. Now, I'm not taking the inventory menus or the spell menus into account. Those fall into the category of inventory menus, and I'll get to those another day maybe. But the pause menu is just a great background with text. It's really very boring. Sure, they wanted to focus on making the main game the best experience possible, but Skyrim has been remastered and ported to almost as many consoles as Resident Evil 4 at this point, so I feel like it wouldn't have been that hard to just implement a cool pause menu into the game. Now, L.A. Noire looked at this and said, hold my beer. This is actually a really clever pause menu. It's so cool that when you pause the game, you reference a notebook. Like you're a detective in the mid-40s, so it makes sense that you would reference a notebook for everything. You have sketches in there of witnesses that you've looked at, notes about each one of them, questions to ask them. It's actually really cool. But while L.A. Noire may be one of the most clever pause menus, Mario Odyssey is easily the most expressive. I love this pause menu so much. It's so simple, but it's so good. I mean, just look at how happy Mario is, and if you sit there for too long, Cappy will actually actually leave and then come back. And he actually looks very angry on the pause screen, like, come on, man, can we just boot up the game and play already? Like, it really adds to the whole vibe of Mario Odyssey. That game is already energetic enough, and just full of nonstop action, that it would make sense that when you pause the game, the characters kind of look like agitated, like they want to jump back into it.
So that was just a handful of pause menus that I felt like needed to be talked about, and it feels really good giving them some recognition. But pause menus aren't the only thing needing some recognition lately. Yeah, I'm so glad that I have you, Hyrule Historia.